Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the first webinar in our new Foundations for Successful Practice Management series. Good practice governance skills are not just for practice owners and directors. As a part of the practice management team, you also need to understand your role in the governance of the organization. So together you can create a safer, more compliant, and successful practice. This is why PracticeHub has created this webinar series presented in collaboration with market-leading practice management educators, UNE Partnerships. We have had yet another overwhelming response to this webinar, so clearly it's a topic of much interest. And we have a fabulous panel with us this afternoon who will be addressing some of the many questions which have come through during registration, which we thank you for. If you do have additional questions, please enter them into our chat and our team will try our best to get through them all. On our panel this afternoon, we're very fortunate to have Gary Smith, who is known as the guru of practice management. Gary is an academic director of UNE Health Programs and an experienced health practice manager. He is a former national and New South Wales president of the AAPM and holds a number of board positions in the healthcare sector nationally and internationally. With more than 35 years real-world experience as a practice manager, Gary has broad expertise in managing large multidisciplinary healthcare facilities and in healthcare reform. He understands how to navigate the challenges practice managers face daily and is uniquely placed to share his knowledge on running a successful, sustainable healthcare practice. Joining him is Anna Maria Gibb. Anna Maria is the co-creator of My Practice Manual, which is now called PracticeHub. She's passionate about helping healthcare organizations run more efficiently and minimize their risk using better business management systems and processes. Anna Maria has a background in practice management and qualifications in business and adult education. She regularly presents on business systems and processes. Just a bit of housekeeping before we kind of kick off this session. You should be able to hear us talking at this point. If you do have a question, as I mentioned before, please pop it into the chat field and we'll try our best to answer it during the session. A recording of this particular session will actually be sent out to everyone who has registered early next week. I'll now hand you over to Gary Smith.
Thank you very much, Stephanie, and welcome everyone. When we talk about human resources in a business situation, it means the workforce. That is, the employees of a business and what skills and energy they bring. This includes any ideas, creativity, knowledge, and talent that employees bring with them and use to help the organisation be successful. In other words, the resources a person has or the knowledge and experience developed over the years. Human resource management focuses on bringing in new employees with talents for the company and managing employees. Another function is to guide and help employees by providing direction where necessary. Human resource management is now a vital part of any organisation. It helps with increasing the morale of workers by working on relationships between employees and their employers and constantly striving to make them better. In this presentation today, I'm going to touch on the key elements of human resource management and provide you some guidance on what you may need to consider in good HR management. Today, the topics we're going to cover are recruitment, selection and induction, performance management, training and professional management, and Anna Marie is then going to talk about how PracticeHub can support you in good HR management. Successful practices are those that employ competent and experienced people who know what they are required to do in their role and just do it. It is relevant to emphasise the importance of people creating, developing, and maintaining a positive practice image, as this is closely aligned to practice success. You may enjoy working in the most elaborate building with the best equipment, facilities and services in the world, but however, these things will only not continuously attract new patients or keep current patients if employees are not helpful or not positive in any way. A practice that employs great people to meet its needs is often ahead of the rest. The benefits of a successful practice are evident in that it runs smoothly with a supportive and proactive team. All members of a team have a clear understanding of their roles and they can contribute to the success of the practice. But for this all to occur, first and foremost, effective recruitment and selection processes must take place to put people into positions so that practice can meet their strategic and operational objectives. Now let's look at this process in more detail. Before the recruitment process commences, it is important to think about the process. The planning, the recruitment process is best detailed in the slide. It's called the 7-step planning process. The first 2 steps look at people's requirements in terms of strategic and operational plans and the need for consultation within these areas of the practice. These first 2 steps probe the need to develop or adapt the position description statement and person's specification for the position. The time spent in preparation here is invaluable if the process is to recruit in a satisfactory outcome to meet the objectives of the practice. The job analysis clearly analyse what do we have, what do we need, and how much can we afford, and what we are trying to achieve, and links the overall practice vision, mission and goals in this ever-changing environment. New skills may be required. The job analysis and position description statement are 2 of the most critical components of hiring new staff, as they will be used to performance manage staff at a later date if required to do so. Step 3, advertise. Considerations here would include where to advertise and why with costings. The position or the skills you may be looking for will determine where and how you advertise. Step 4, the reviewing of the applications must always be open, equitable and transparent. This process draws on the skills required of those responsible for the process. The assessment strategies used to discern who meets the job needs, how to achieve balanced decision making, screening, culling and reference checking, feedback to applicants and record keeping. Step 5, the interview. This is a crucial part of the selection process, and planning them is imperative for the overall success of the entire process. Remember, if specific skills are required for the position, it is always an advantage to have a person with that skill set on the interview panel. Don't be afraid also to use scenario style interview processes or even technical style assessments, for example, typing speeds, ECG usage, etc., if they are required for that position. The final step addresses the formalisation of making the offer to the successful applicant, determining mutually acceptable conditions of employment, formalising the arrangement with a letter of offer or a contract. It also entails thanking those unsuccessful applicants. The induction process requires careful planning with regard to who will induct, how will the process take place, the pacing of the training, careful planning with regard to who will induct, how will the process take place. This recruitment life cycle is a term used for the complete recruiting process from start to finish. This is why it is sometimes called the end-to-end recruitment process. It starts with the recruitment and selection process. Then it's about the engagement and the retention strategies, then how performance is managed. The training and development is provided, and how we determine future workforce requirements if we start the recruitment process again if required. Having a structure like this ensures that organisations and employees' needs are met, thus allowing a high-performing practice to occur. Now, this framework also ensures that your staff can see what their employment structure holds for them and what the practice's expectations of them are. Designing and encouraging an employee experience that leads to longevity, success, and great employee engagement should be a permanent mindset in our practice. It should be part of your practice's DNA, or what I call a practice culture. So what is practice culture? Well, in my terms, it's the way we do things around here. Rather than looking at the employee engagement effort as a one-off time endeavours when morale is low, the employee life cycle model frames engagement as a designed experience embedded into the trajectory of every employee within your practice. This model, the employee lifestyle cycle, is used to visualise how your employee engages with your practice that they are part of. This model is geared to encompass the the experience of the employee within the practice. By mapping out the employee's journey, you will see two benefits: talent retention and reputational improvement. The ability to effectively allocate resources and efforts to reduce turnover reduces time and money that turnover costs your practice. And I'll provide you the costs later in this presentation. Similarly, a better reputation increases the chances of hiring more new talent, meaning a more committed and driven workforce. The upfront investment by your practice is committing to the employee's life cycle, which is crucial to the employee's success. In good human resource management, it is critical that we adhere to the legislative and ethical requirements of employment and employee management. The Fair Work Commission requirements, work health and safety requirements, anti-discrimination, privacy and confidentiality, and of course the Australian privacy principles, of which there are 13 APPs. All these provide a framework in which we, the employer, and the employee must comply with, otherwise we can then become exposed to possible legal actions. In Australia, non-discriminatory hiring practices are legislated. In the main, this relates to equal opportunities, whereby both practices and attitudes must be non-discriminatory. It therefore goes without saying that the best basis for job selection must be on merit. Legal considerations, as I identified in the previous slide, relate to all legislative requirements of employment, the processes we must meet. As I previously indicated, this includes, for example, awards, ensuring employee entitlements are met in a timely manner, employee privacy, safety and welfare. Employment documentation that is completed and signed by the employee should be returned to the employer, and a copy given to the employee to retain in their own records. The list of requirements on this slide are just but a few of the appointment processes. There will be other information to be collected, like bank and superannuation details and emergency contacts. In regard to a letter of engagement, Fair Work have a standard engagement letter which covers off on the legal requirements of an appointment. In a letter of engagement, the following information should be covered off. 1, the position, which identifies the start date, the employment status, casual or part-time, and duties or responsibilities. Also should include 2, probation. You should state the period of probation. Now, this may vary depending upon the complexity of the position and the acquired skills of the new person. It may not be a standard 3-month. The third thing in letter of engagement are terms and conditions of employment. Firstly, identify the relevant awards and any additional requirements specifically relating to that award. Letter of engagement should include the hours of work, the remuneration, how much will they be paid, and how they will be paid, and what will be their remuneration formula in relation to moving forward. Leave provisions, the termination of employment process and confidentiality. These points set the framework for a solid employee-employer relationship. The induction, or what I call the onboarding process, is critical to the success of the performance of the individual. The number one reason what motivates staff, as reported by the Gallup organisation research, is that they need to know what is expected of them. The induction for a new employee may include some of the following: about the practice administration, patient management, patient health needs, computer administration, human resource management, treatment room and facilities, along with CQI, to name a few. Invest in the time in the induction process. The majority of practices do not do this well. Short-term pain with long-term gain. You need to take the long-term view. The induction program takes time and may involve several staff, but it's a very good investment. How can you expect staff to perform if they have not been trained? A good induction program will contribute to practice's accreditation requirements if you're in general practice. Anna Maria will be talking to you later in this presentation of the role of policies and procedures in respect to the induction program. Also, a good induction program may also assist you in any performance management process you may have to address an employee's poor performance in the future. If you have staff who have different duties like reception, nursing, registrars, even medical students, you may have different induction programs. I have a different induction program for my registrars. Performance management is just not about names of a performance review or appraisal system that just focus on the individual's performance. It's broader and more strategic than that. It has the ability to influence staff retention and development, productivity, return on investment, even organisational strategy. In short, it hits the bottom line. There is no denying the importance of an effective appraisal or review process. But if these tools are the major focus, then performance management is unlikely to have a constructive impact on an organisation's performance. A performance management system, or known as a PMS, is a systematic approach that sets the framework of performance management. It covers areas such as monitoring and reviewing performance, managing underperformance in a framework which complies with the relative legislative requirements, structured performance appraisals, which I'll cover in the next slide. The underpinning aim of performance management is to create a work environment in which all staff can achieve their best and can be involved in continuous quality improvement. If their performance is managed benevolently and supportively, they will choose to engage in an appropriate and relevant processes through which they can be trained and developed, ultimately contributing more effectively to the plans of the practice. From a strategic perspective, it could be argued that performance management assists team members by clarifying what is expected of them and their roles, how they are performing against those expectations, and what facilities and supports their needs in order to be effective in their roles. When consideration of the cultures around performance management, it should be valued, not dreaded. It is important to identify the areas the individual is to perform in, known as key resultant areas or KRAs. For example, finance, customer service, human resource management, etc. And under each of those KRAs, you then place a set of KPIs or key performance indicators. For example, under finance KRA, a KPI may be to produce a set of monthly P&L and balance sheets. If there is underperformance of an employee, these performance gaps need to be identified and managed at that point in time and not held off until the annual performance appraisal is due. Deal with poor performance at that point in time. Ask yourself, where is the gap in the employee's performance? This is about the employee's current state and what should be the desired state. Once you ascertain both these 2 points, the gap becomes obvious for both the employee and the employer. The next step is to start the process of setting goals for improvement and continuing to provide feedback to the employee in the process of their performance against an agreed set of goals. Fair Work Guidelines provides an excellent framework for managing poor performance. Failure to do this could result in a possible unfair dismissal claim. As I have indicated in this slide, transparency is the key along with open communication processes because we generally wish to support the employee. Failure for improvement of the staff member's performance may then lead to termination of the employment. If this is the case, the Fair Work have an excellent, well-documented process which templated documents for the process, or contact a HR specialist to provide your advice. Does your practice have a culture of a learning environment? Please do not take the need for learning for staff training lightly. There are two types of knowledge: foundation and currency. Both are critical for the success of your practices and the service that you deliver to your patients. So what is the systematic training cycle? Well, it's a framework by which is used to determine what people must know and do in their roles. The cycle itself comprises of 5 parts. The first part, determining the training needs. Carry out a gap analysis of each staff member. It will be amazing what you will find. Ask your staff what education and training they would like to do. The second part of the systematic training cycle is determine what you as a practice wish to achieve from the training, taking into consideration the practice's strategic goals and compliance requirements. The third part of the cycle is construct a training, define how the training is to occur. Internal or external, online or face-to-face. The fourth part of the cycle is to construct a training plan or a training matrix for all staff. Make sure it's over a 2 or 3 year period. That's okay. It's very good for budgeting purposes and compliance requirements into compliance timeframes. The last part of the systematic training cycle is to decide how will the success of the training be measured from the point of view from the staff and the practice. Don't forget to share the knowledge or experience of the training and education. At staff meetings, get the staff member who has carried out some professional development to share their learnings with other staff. The knowledge they gain is not for them to keep. Teams and leadership. It is important that leaders in your organisation encourage growth in your team. When we're looking at team building exercises or building an effective team, there are 6 points or 6 strategies you need to consider. In building teams, we need to establish clear goals and objectives of the reason for being of the team. You need to develop what I call a mutual support network in relation to providing the knowledge and the skill sets for them to act as a team. Learn from our mistakes. And I think this is important when we're looking at teams in HR management. Learn from mistakes. Start to look at, in good team building exercise, implementing a responsive problem-solving process. In good team building, encourage a shared leadership and develop open communication. Good HR management of your staff in the provision of information and good induction and good policies and procedures also allows good team building. There are fairly standardized stages of development that all teams go through, no matter what they are formed to do. These stages can be recognized by various characteristics. Perhaps you'll be able to identify with some, if not all, for a team you are currently working within or did belong in the past. The Tuckman model of team development is an old one, but very simple, but is very useful in understanding where your employees or even you're up to in team development. The stages are the forming, storming, norming, and performing. Each stage has its own set of characteristics, and as a person managing staff, it is important to understand these stages of team development. During these stages, the duration of these stages will vary, as some groups will work through this process much faster than others. A highly effective, well-resourced team will force and progress quickly through the early stages to soon be performing well. A diverse, under-resourced and difficult team will take much longer in the storming stage and may never end up performing well at all. So where do you think your staff are at regarding the COVID-19 vaccination rollout strategy? How much does it cost to employ a new person? A rule of thumb is typically 1.25 to 1.4 times the annual salary of a person you are employing to bring this new employee up to a level where they are productive to your business. What does it cost to retain what you have? Gallup research indicated that only 34% of employees leave a business because of money. If my maths is correct, that leaves 66% leave for other reasons. Your challenge is to focus on the 66% and manage those reasons, and it all starts with good human resource management. Over to you, Anna Maria, to show how the use of PracticeHub can assist practices in supporting good human resource management processes.
Terrific. Thanks, Gary. That was such useful information. And I think in particular about a lot of these things, it's about having good processes in place and following those as well. I think it's also great for succession planning too. I think, you know, it's good when you've got new practice managers coming in, they've got a system to work with as well. So as Gary mentioned, I'm going to do a demonstration of our PracticeHub product platform and focusing in particular on the recruitment, selection and induction processes and how PracticeHub is particularly useful in that regard. Now, as I'm getting ready to start, I wonder if I could prevail upon some of you, or as many of you as possible, to, in the chat box, let me know how many of you have ever started a job, and it doesn't need to be your current one, but how many times have you started a job and felt like maybe you were thrown in the deep end? And if the answer to that is yes, what's like 1 or 2 words to express how you felt when that happened? So just as I get started here, if you'd like to have a think about that, yeah, thank you, overwhelmed, inadequate, stressed. Yeah, just imagine that's how you felt. And it's, I think, something if you've been there, you really want to avoid other people feeling the same way. Yeah, thank you. I can see overwhelmed is pretty popular there. Unsupported and lost, yes, very much so. Yeah, no handover, isn't that awful? Loss of confidence, exactly, frustrated. So many emotions, so many feelings if you feel like you've been thrown in the deep end there. So thank you for that. Yes, anxious. I always felt anxious when that happened. All right, so let's have a look where we can minimize the risk of that happening with your, if you were to use something like PracticeHub to help set up some systems. All right. Okay, so I have many screens on the go here and just getting everything lined up. All right, so PracticeHub, an online practice management system. You can see from the side menu down here, we've got lots of different things. Gary referenced the importance of policies and procedures, which are in the manual. Task management, so just having systems where regular tasks need to be completed. Messaging, so one of the things I'll talk about is the importance of, you know, taking everyone on this process with you to get people engaged and feel as part of that retention process. So let's get started and have a look at the manual. All right, so our policy and procedures manual. Now, again, if there's any of you participants that have PracticeHub and you had our policy and procedure templates, you would probably find some of these very familiar, but it's still a good refresh to go back and have a look at these. So I've kind of pulled out our human resource management and some personnel stuff just to highlight today the things that are in here. So Gary has mentioned the importance of having things like roles and responsibilities, especially in that early stage when you're doing job analysis and working out your position descriptions. And it's really simple as things like a table. What are the tasks that the practice manager is responsible for? What is the reception and admin team responsible for? Nurses, medical practice assistants, that sort of thing. So by having this list, it makes it very simple for you then to translate those into your job analysis and then update position descriptions accordingly. So that's one aspect of the tasks and responsibilities. And I think, you know, I find, I wonder too, you know, practices that have that have employed medical practice assistants. I imagine that completely changes a lot of the things that you think about in the roles. You know, that is probably a separate column. Are there things that the nursing staff no longer need to do, or it's a lesser part of their role, because now that's something your medical practice assistants can do. So thinking about these things and how they're changing is also very important. One of our other policies is around recruiting and supporting staff. So again, making these things transparent and clear to the team. So this is how you do these things, you know, setting those expectations as well. So what are the most important routine tasks? What are the other things that they need to think about? What skills, knowledge, qualifications do they need to perform those tasks? All of the things that you need to work through when you're thinking about recruiting and appointing new staff. And if it were me, probably managing a practice and using PracticeHub, I'd probably have a page that relates to advertising, which is one of the key steps that Gary mentioned. You know, where are the best places to advertise? Do you have some wording? Making sure that you update your ads to include the various types of software that you're using. I mean, we get very excited when we see ads that say, you know, must have or desirable to have PracticeHub experience. And I think that's really useful. So making sure that your list of the experience, the qualifications, software that people need to be familiar with is up to date with what you are currently using in your practice as well. So once we've gone through and done our job analysis, of course, we've got our position descriptions. And one of the things I really like about this is that you can have a policy around what are in your position descriptions and how they're managed. But to kind of bring this information ecosystem all together, you can also link the position descriptions in there as well. In PracticeHub, we've got some really good templates. I think they're good. We've got some really good templates, which again, I feel is kind of just saving you time to not have to reinvent that wheel, but also much better than just sort of randomly Googling for these things. So, you know, these position descriptions, they talk about what's the purpose of this role. And I think that's really valuable. Who do they report to? What are the responsibilities? So breaking them up into those categories as well. You know, standard things like compliance, occupational health and safety, safety and quality, all of those things, and then breaking it up into the more specific details. So you can see if you were, for example, recruiting a new medical practice assistant or a new maybe assistant practice manager, having a template that kind of gets you 80 to 90% of the way there is certainly going to save you time and helps to embed that structure in the process as well. So, and I know, you know, sort of different roles that you have and that they can be easily updated is really important. Okay. All right, so thinking about, Gary was mentioning when you're confirming the appointment of people to the practice, again, I think it's really valuable that this information is transparent. There's this sense of, you know, everybody knows what the expectations are, information is easy to find, that we have a culture of sharing and keeping people informed and making it easy for them to do their jobs. So again, you know, things that we've highlighted, the code of conduct. So the code of conduct in here talks about behaving according to acceptable professional social standards, legal scope of responsibilities, maintaining skills, knowledge, etc., and particularly if there are professional specialty organisations. Very important, of course, in healthcare, complying with privacy and confidentiality, and importantly, following the practices, policies and procedures. So I tend to think of it as, you know, you've got your legislation, you've got standards, and then you've got your internal policies. And these are all things that need to be, can be included in the code of conduct. Now, of course, what happens is that often I think, you know, the process is either email people a bundle of forms or hand them a pack. But one of the things you can do in here is do this stuff electronically. So if I had a new staff member, let me just quickly whiz over to my new staff member and show you what it looks like from their point of view. All right, so my new staff member has some policies that they need to sign off on. So I'm sort of working on the assumption that most of you on this webinar are practice managers or owners. But so what I've been showing you is the administrator version. So the things that you've got the full rights to drive this system, but for your regular users, your practice team, it's much easier. They have a much simpler view. So for example, the all-important ethical dilemmas policy and procedure, and you can see there, here's our policy and the procedure, some guidelines around that. As a new starter, or if this has been recently updated for existing staff, I've got a note here. You're required to read this as part of your induction and compliance. I have read and understood and agree to comply, and they can confirm that. And that means now, as the administrator, you've got a record of the fact that they have signed off on that. So you'll see who and when each policies were signed off by. So that's making that process simpler. And certainly, again, you know, if I was to ask you to pop in the chat box, how much time do you spend managing personnel documentation? And, you know, is there a better way? Would you like to, or the question might be, would you like to spend less time? Because I think this will help you do that. Too much, yes. Yes, indeed. All right, so, but thinking about that, if you could basically, every time a new person starts, you set them up in the system, according to their role, they get a package, basically an alert to the suite of policies and procedures you want them to read and sign off on. That will make life so much simpler. Similarly, if something changes, so I don't know if many of you will remember, we started out with 10 privacy principles and then they rehashed them to become 13. You would need to go back through and get people to sign off on that updated policy. This is a very simple process to do those sorts of things as well. All right, some other examples of policies and procedures that you would probably want to have your team go through and be familiar with. Dress code and presentation. Do you provide a uniform? Is there no uniform? You know, what are the rules around the dress code and the presentation? So that's an important one, I think. Other things that we've got here is the privacy and confidentiality policy, critical. Gary mentioned our need to comply with the fair work requirements and the awards. One of the things I really like in here is that you can put hyperlinks into these organisations or government bodies. So rather than downloading and storing a copy of the award, you can put a link into it. And the beauty of that is that it will take you to the most current version of that at any point in time. So here I am, this is the last version on the 26th of March. As opposed to perhaps downloading that PDF where you open it and the first thing you think is, oh, I wonder if this is the most current version. I better go and have a look. So you can see here we've got Fair Work, we've got the awards, the Nurses Award, and you can basically add any other links in here that you want to include that are relevant to your organisation. All right, so this is one that I see crop up in a lot of forums. around doctors treating practice staff and their families. So again, in this policy that we've created, we reference the medical board's code of conduct, and it talks about the section that references about treating practice staff and their families. And then you can have your procedure in your practice that's relevant. So depending on what your situation is, you can customize that procedure accordingly. And the other good thing, of course, is that there are resources and references. So another link to that, the Medical Council of New South Wales has some guidelines, and even the link to an article here from Medical Observer. So these are things that kind of back up, the policy is why you do what you do. The procedure is kind of the how, who, and when it gets done. But you can also back that up with the third-party information that backs up why you do what you do as well. Other things, this is one that I find really interesting. And again, I think for clarity, it's really important, I think if there's one thing that we know is you can't assume that everyone is going to think the same way as you, or that their previous experience in the workplace has been what your expectation, the same as yours and your expectations. So here we have a policy around the authorised use of staff contacts. Who can you give the doctor's mobile to, even within the team? How do you go about contacting people? So it's very much a case of being clear about those things, and then there's no mistakes and no unfortunate errors. Other policies that are worth considering and having in your policy and procedures manual: investigation policy. How do we investigate issues, breaches, performance management issues, and the discipline policy. Of course, Gary also mentioned performance management and review. So very much around having your performance management policy. I do tend to think performance management is a process, not a checklist. And so for me, very much, whilst you can attach some sort of template format that you use, it's beyond, it's more than that as well. Backtracking slightly, well, I won't backtrack to that yet. I've just thought of another resource that we have that talks about the interviewing process, but I'll come back to that. So all the standard things around discrimination, sexual harassment, bullying. You can have policies, as Gary mentioned in his presentation, talking about what will people be paid, when will they be paid, how are they paid, those sorts of things, having that information easily available. Another one I really like to feel that maybe people don't often consider is, leave arrangements. So, how do you cope when all your, several members of the reception team all come and want leave at the same time? Do you have a policy? How much notice do they need to give you? Is there a certain number of people who can be off at the same time? So can 2 be off? Can 3 be off? Having a think about that, you preempt any of these issues that might come through. All right, so in some instances your team do require a working with children check, so again there's a policy around that. Moving on to training, so professional development, again an area that Gary talked about, and being a big part of your retention process for success of your practice. Things that you can consider in PracticeHub is creating basically a file as such for individual staff members. So here I've got my example. We've got our assistant practice manager, and apart from all her contact details and things like that, I've also got her training and development plan in here. So thinking about, we've had our annual performance review. What are our targets and goals? What's the action plan? What support or resources are required? When's our target completion date? What was the actual completion date? Oh, I'm getting ahead of myself on that one. So you can actually go through, and these things, having them documented, I think it's so important to document these things and keep them front of mind, because it makes people accountable, and accountability I think is very important. The other thing you can do is, of course, have a training register. So recording, whether it's external, in-house, online, face-to-face, all those variations, you can record all this information in here. And I think too, particularly for general practice staff, For accreditation, it's so easy to be able to show this. It's important to have done the training, but it's a great way to be able to demonstrate that information as well. The other thing that I would create, again, if it were my practice, the other thing you can do is a group training register. So individuals, yes, but again, you know, one of the things you need to do regularly is the safe use of clinical equipment. So you can do a refresher training, who attended, who was the provider, how long did it take, did they get CPD points, yes or no. So keeping that sort of track of that in a group training register is a really useful way of keeping those records handy and, again, really transparent and obvious. So I would be remiss if I didn't show you the online training modules. So Gary talked about foundation learning and currency learning. And so what I think is that within PracticeHub, we've got these 8 online learning modules already configured. And one of the things I think is really useful is I would consider these sort of foundation learning in that regard. And the beauty of this, of course, is you can select which roles need to complete which modules. And one of the things I would do, again, from the point of view of being able to encourage the team as a team building activity, as a learning activity, working effectively with adult learners who like to relate their real life with their learning. I would look at doing these as part of maybe your regular staff meeting, work through a module together, talk about actual instances and compare it to what the course includes. So each module has a series of learning outcomes and you can work through them. And again, as I say, you know, do we all remember that a Medicare number is not an approved identifier? You know, just reinforcing that so that people are reminded of this. Things like, you know, transferring of medical records, you know, have a discussion. Remember that time the father came in and he wanted access to his 16-year-old daughter's medical records? How did we deal with that? What do we know, etc.? Is everyone clear on these things? Really valuable information. At the end of these, there's a quiz. So thinking about, you know, you've got a policy around transfer of medical records or access to medical records. The user has gone in and signed off, yes, I've read and understood and I agree to comply. This is also a way of backing up that knowledge, testing their knowledge and getting evidence of that information. So they go through, again, if you were doing it as a group, I'd then send everyone off to go and do the quiz individually. They need to get 80% to pass and they get 3 attempts to do so. And again, you know, Gary was talking about their gap analysis and things like that. This is a great way to identify gaps in knowledge and when more training might be required. And then that can in turn influence or contribute to the ongoing training and development and planning for people. So it's kind of a whole process that comes together. All right, I am conscious of time. So probably one last thing I would highlight is these days, there is so much information out there. There's kind of information overload. But what we've tried to do is put in information. So under our human resource management, there's a whole lot of information that you can access. So things like recruitment and selection checklists, you know, a checklist about staff performance and development, you know, things like the position descriptions that I showed you, the template for the staff immunisation, consent and refusal, very important. And even, you know, as Gary was mentioning, the interview process, to be able to standardise that. Makes it so much easier, makes it much easier for you to compare people. So we've got our interview template. What should your questions concentrate on? Talking about, you know, those open questions, scenario-based questions that Gary also mentioned. You know, what were the things you enjoyed? What did you not enjoy? Etc., etc. So these again are things that allow you to focus on getting on with what you need to do, not hunting around for information, templates and other resources that you need. It's much easier to use a system like this. just to wrap up, thank you to those of you who submitted questions before the webinar. There was a comment around successfully navigating a practice through change management. I personally think that something like PracticeHub is really useful for change management. Even if you've had another system, you've got the your documentation in a network drive, you've got paper-based, hard copy folders of content. Implementing something like this, bringing everyone along on the journey as to how this change is good for the whole team, focusing on what's in it for them, what's in it for everyone. There are benefits to everyone. I think that's really useful to promote and support that change management process. I think things like even just using the message board, indicating, we've got our monthly most valuable player nominations. So getting that sense of team building and communication, opening that up. We're preparing accreditation prep meeting on Thursday. So simple processes that really open up that transparency and communication will support that change management as well. We did have, and I will touch on this very briefly, we did have a question regarding clinical governance and leadership across multiple sites. Whilst I won't go into it in great detail, you can certainly contact us for more information, but we do have an enterprise version of the platform, and that is really useful for being able to do communication and processes structured across multiple sites, keeping documentation in there for your clinical governance and leadership team, where they can find their information and share what they want, but not necessarily everything. So these are things that are in and can be done with PracticeHub. So what I've shown you today is a very brief overview. And if you would like more information, Persephone is going to go through and share the next steps with you. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to add them to the chat. But otherwise, Persephone, I will hand back to you.
Thank you so much, Anna Maria, for that. I think that was really beneficial in terms of what you've shown us and how that kind of ties into what Gary was also saying previously. I guess if there are any questions, just please enter those into the chat right now. But thank you so much for the questions that we did receive earlier through the registration process. We do actually really appreciate those. And if you do have any further questions, there will be a survey at the end of this where you can pop those down as well, and we'll be able to reach out to you individually and answer those as well. Anna Maria, if you could just go to the next slide in terms of next steps. If you are already a PracticeHub client, please contact our support team to find out how we can better help you. And if you're not a PracticeHub client as yet, visit our website to find out about the benefits and the features of PracticeHub. As Anna Maria mentioned, this is just a really short kind of snippet of what the platform can actually do and what it's capable of. There is a far kind of greater scope of work behind it that it is capable of as well. If you'd like to contact our sales team to book a demonstration, please book online. The information is down below to call us, email us, or just visit the website and you can book online via that particular channel. What I might do just quickly before we close is throw it back to Gary and just find out if he has any kind of final thoughts to wrap up, and then back to Anna Maria afterwards.
Thanks very much, Stephanie. Well, we know that human resource management is actually dealing with people's emotions. And I think the challenge for us as a practice manager is how do we deal with people's emotions? I think we need, in good HR management, is about openness and transparency of systems and processes. There is to be no left field unknowns. Important in good HR management is documentation, which sets you a framework up by how you may, which then allows, the most important part, good documentation allows staff to perform to their best. And what you and I want as good practice managers is staff to perform to their best. So openness and transparency, good documentation, and remember we're dealing with emotions. Thanks, Stephanie.
Anna Maria, final thoughts from you?
Yeah, similar to Gary, documentation, but I would say spend as little time as possible on the systems to do, get a good system to manage the documentation so you can focus on dealing with the individuals, with the team, with the things that really matter, and automate as much as you can of the rest of the process, to really enable you to use your time effectively.
Wonderful. Well, thank you once again to our fantastic panelists. We really do appreciate your time. There will be a survey at the end of the webinar, so please complete it. We love your feedback, and we do actually action whatever we can from there as well. To just reiterate, a webinar recording will be emailed to you next week, so feel free to share that with any of your colleagues that might have missed out. And please also remember that this was just the first of a series of webinars that we will be presenting in partnership with UNE Partnerships. So please look out for those future invites in your inbox, and also be aware that you can register for those online on our website. If you do have any questions, feel free to contact us at info@practicehub.com.au. But thank you all so much for giving up your time today and joining us. We do appreciate it. Have a good day.